If you were transported back to 1970s Britain, the first thing that would hit your senses is the omnipresent, heavy stench of tobacco smoke. In that era, smoking wasn't just considered normal, it was an integral part of the British cultural code. Today, it sounds like a plot from a dystopian novel, but in the 70s, you could light up in almost any enclosed space. The most vivid example was public transport. London's famous double-decker buses had designated smoking zones, usually on the top deck. By the end of the day, the air there became so thick and yellow with tar that passengers literally couldn't see the front of the cabin. The walls and ceilings of British rail carriages were coated in a characteristic sticky brown residue that no one even bothered to clean. But what looks truly shocking to a modern person is smoking in places associated with health and children. In the 1970s, doctors in British hospitals could calmly smoke right in their offices while consulting patients. Furthermore, hospital beds were equipped with ashtrays. Smoking in wards was considered a normal way to relieve stress after surgery. In television studios, talk show hosts and their guests smoked directly on camera, blowing clouds of smoke into the viewers' faces. Even in schools, teachers often conducted lessons with a cigarette in hand, and staff rooms resembled underground casinos shrouded in a thick fog. Today, the UK has some of the strictest anti-smoking laws in the world. The 2007 Act completely banned smoking in all enclosed public places and workplaces. What was a symbol of style and relaxation in the 70s has today become an illegal act punishable by heavy fines. Cinemas, restaurants, and even pubs, which for centuries were saturated with the smell of tobacco, now smell of food and freshness. Looking at archival footage from 1978 or 1979, where people smoke in elevators or grocery stores, we realize how radically our understanding of personal freedom and collective health has changed. In the 1970s, the interior of a British car was a place of high danger, though back then it was perceived as the ultimate expression of freedom. The most shocking fact for a modern person is that the use of seatbelts was entirely voluntary. Although many cars were already equipped with them, most drivers considered them uncomfortable, restrictive, or even dangerous. There was a mythical belief that a belt would prevent a quick escape from a car during an accident. Children in the 70s were free passengers. They bounced on the back seat, stood between the front seats, or in the height of road fashion, lay on the rear parcel shelf under the window. The concept of a car seat practically didn't exist. Infants were often transported simply in pram carrycots, sitting on the seat. But the real nightmare of those years was the attitude toward drink driving. In 70s Britain, getting behind the wheel after a few pints at the pub wasn't considered a crime. In the eyes of society, it was a joke. Police rarely stopped drivers for breathalyzer tests unless they were clearly swerving. Advertising campaigns of the time were only beginning to timidly suggest that alcohol and driving were a bad mix, but social pressure was minimal. Many men took pride in being able to drive home on autopilot after a Saturday night. Road fatality rates were colossal, but this was accepted as the inevitable price for progress and mobility. Today, the situation has turned 180 degrees. Mandatory seatbelt use was introduced in Britain only in 1983, and now it carries a heavy fine. Drink driving has turned into one of the most shameful and strictly punished crimes. License revocation, massive fines, and prison sentences have become the reality. Modern Think campaigns have made drinking and driving socially unacceptable. What seemed like a normal end to an evening at the pub in 1975 is today a direct path to jail and the instant end of a career. Looking at old photos of family trips where children are literally flying around the cabin of a Ford, modern parents feel genuine horror, realizing how fragile life was in that free era. Children's playgrounds in 1970s Britain would be called Special Forces training camps today. At that time, the design of play areas was based on two principles: iron and concrete. A typical playground consisted of giant steel structures installed directly onto asphalt or hard, trampled earth. The most popular attraction was the rocket, or witch's hat, a heavy cone-shaped swing that spun at tremendous speed. If a child let go, they flew onto the concrete, and if the swing kept moving, it could deliver a serious blow to the head of anyone standing nearby. Slides often reached 4 meters in height and had no protective sides, and their metal surfaces heated up in the sun so much that they left real burns. The situation in the workplace looked no less terrifying. The concept of health and safety, which today in Britain is taken to the absolute limit, was something out of science fiction in the 70s. On London construction sites, you could see workers moving along steel beams at heights of dozens of meters without any safety ropes or helmets. The most that protected their heads was a cloth flat cap. Safety goggles, earplugs, or respirators were considered a sign of weakness. Working with asbestos, which flew everywhere as dust, was done without masks. Industrial machines lacked protective guards, and workplace accidents were common occurrences, dismissed as professional hazards. Today, British safety standards are considered among the toughest in the world. Modern playgrounds are covered with soft rubber, and every structure undergoes hundreds of checks for the absence of sharp corners. At construction sites, every worker is required to wear a full set of protection, and the lack of insurance or safety measures leads to huge fines and closure for companies. What in the 1970s was called character building, or real man's work, is today qualified as criminal negligence. Looking at photos of children hanging from rusty iron bars over a concrete floor, or welders working without eye protection, we realize that the miracle of that era is not in progress, but in the fact that so many people were able to survive to this day at all. Today, if a teacher in a British school even raises their voice at a student, it can result in a scandal or dismissal. But in the 1970s, physical violence was a legal and official tool of upbringing. Corporal punishment in British schools wasn't just allowed, it was the standard. Every teacher had their arsenal. In England and Wales, it was the cane, a thin, flexible rattan stick used to strike palms or buttocks. In Scotland, they used the tawse, a heavy leather strap with a split end. You could get the belt for anything: poor handwriting, being 5 minutes late, talking in class, or even for being left-handed and trying to write with your left hand. The most chilling part of this system was its mundanity. Punishment was often carried out publicly in front of the whole class to intimidate others. Former students recall the ritual: walking to the front, stretching out your hands, and waiting for a strike so forceful that palms remained swollen and blue for days. It wasn't seen as anything extraordinary. Parents usually sided with the school, believing that if a child was punished, they must have deserved it. In some private boarding schools, even harsher methods were practiced, where senior students, prefects, were allowed to hit younger ones, creating an atmosphere of fear and hazing sanctioned by adults. Today, this seems like barbarism, Corporal punishment was only banned in UK state schools in 1986 and in private schools even later, with the final ban in some parts of the UK occurring as late as 2003. What 50 years ago was called maintaining discipline is today classified as criminal child abuse. The modern British school, with its emphasis on psychological comfort and child rights, is the polar opposite of the harsh classrooms of the 70s. Looking at old school logbooks, which kept a strict tally of every stroke of the cane, modern Britons cannot believe that their parents lived in a system where school was a place of physical pain. If you were to step into a typical British home of the 1970s, you would see an interior that would spark panic in environmental inspectors today. In that era, Britons lived surrounded by materials now recognized as deadly. The king of construction was asbestos. Due to its fire resistance and low cost, it was everywhere, in ceiling tiles, pipe insulation, ironing boards, and even in hair dryers. For years, people inhaled invisible fibers, unaware that they caused incurable lung diseases. The most insane part is that fluffy asbestos was sometimes used as artificial snow for Christmas decorations, which children used to decorate their rooms. The situation with paint was equally terrifying. In the 70s, house walls, radiators, and most shockingly, children's toys and cribs were often coated in paint with high lead content. Lead gave paint brightness and durability, but for children, it was a neurotoxin causing developmental delays and behavioral issues. At the time, there were no strict labeling rules, and parents could buy a safe-looking wooden horse that was actually covered in a poisonous layer. Even the water pipes in many old British houses remained lead-based, slowly poisoning the drinking water consumed by millions. Today, the UK enforces the toughest home safety standards. Asbestos removal is a complex procedure performed by specialists in hazmat suits, completely sealing off the area, while the use of lead-based paint has been banned for decades. What in the 1970s was a standard renovation or a new toy is today perceived as an environmental disaster on a family scale. Britain has come a long way from the careless use of hazardous chemicals to the cult of health and safety. Looking at old 70s product catalogs with their bright colors and innovative materials, we realize that behind the cozy images of the past lay threats whose consequences the nation is still feeling today.